Welcome to Readings from the Bartlett, a selection of extracts from student thesis work from architecture and historic urban environments exhibited at the Bartlett School of Architecture Autumn Show. Hi, this is Aishwarya Jamkedhkar. The title to my reading is Repositioning the Local, Mapping as a Placemaking Tool at the Kumbh Mela. Cities are a cradle of civilization, culture, and innovation. Whether oral, written, or illustrated, narratives can shape the identity of a place. The dissertation proposes mapping as a placemaking tool to redefine urban temporality in the global south. It uses the Kumbh Mela as a laboratory to develop visual semantics. It proposes counter mapping methods to reposition the festival beyond its portrayal of a temporal city to a potential third space. The spatial typologies of the festival are rooted in the geographical and context based practices. The act of storytelling as a placemaking tool is used to develop various socio-spatial practices at the Kumbh Mela. Widely known as the tent city, the research conceptualizes these spaces as urban rooms that facilitate religious and leisure activities. However, the representation of urban environments has been limited to Western cartographic traditions of accuracy, scale, and frame. The drawings do not convey more than the visible reality due to application of uniform mapping techniques. By questioning the role of colonial mapping practices in depicting the local sensibilities of a place, this research aims to move beyond the standard orthogonal representation method and focuses on the transformative and narrative function of drawings and other visual media. Recent theories indicate that most of the existing literature on temporal urbanism is predominantly based in the global north, with different sets of urban practices. Temporal cities are highly localized in character, making them situated urban conditions. Hence, it is important to reconceptualize temporality and its subsequent representation through mapping in a non Western context. New space is created every time new people encounter it. Therefore, mapping, unlike planning, is not a close end project nor a projection of reality. Mapping is a continuous process and is based on relational and context based practices. The social, territorial, and political interrelationships formed in a temporal city are complex, diverse, and dynamic, and the orthogonal system of representation flattens these relations and experiences. Mapping is particularly complex in places that are in between due to the transitory nature of its users and their activities. Hence, countermaps are produced to overcome the standard tropes of mapping and representation. These maps are beyond the rationalized Western model of cartography to reclaim the agency of transitory communities. Alternate mapping practices, as suggested by Nishat Avan in her research paper, Diasporic Agencies, include mapping methods undertaken by native transitory communities before the acceptance of standard cartography as a norm. These counter-cartographic methods, as Avan cites, map something other than the earth and its geography. These include mapping emotions and narratives, events, translocal activities, and networks, organizations, borders, etc. However, time is a central theme in temporal urbanism. Many mapping theorists like Wood and Fels, Connor, and Avan have described the inadequacy of current mapping practices to illustrate space and time. As Wood and Fels remark in their journal article, Design on Science, Myth and Meanings in Maps, we have to see maps as having thickness in time. They further remark, as we are more interested in mapping the local behaviors of a place, we need to recognize that maps embody time just as they embody space. This research redefines Kumbh Mela as a liminal space that facilitates translocal cultures, people, and practices. It repositions the site as a third space that has used storytelling as a placemaking strategy to attract millions of people over the years for a singular purpose. The concept of third space, as introduced by Homi Bhabha, provides the theoretical framework for this research. While previous studies of the festival have focused on its origin and history, urbanization, and planning, this research views the festival as an in between space where collective experiences are formed. Tents built for this event act as urban rooms, promoting cultural engagement, which provides a common purpose for the congregation. This leads to, as Baba defines, cultural hybridity between various participants. Recognizing the complexity and diversity of a temporal city through mapping, the research develops a methodological approach towards mapping practices. The workshop conducted for this research, called Map Your City, resulted in creating visual think pieces. This workshop aimed to democratize the techniques and practices of mapping beyond the agency of an architect or artist. The workshop explored the relationship between the lived, perceived, and imagined realities of cities. In each of the cases, the narratives were formed by the participants based on their individual experiences of navigating through the city. The objectives of this workshop were threefold. 1. To read narratives in maps. 2. To reclaim mapping as a practice to represent everyday geographies and spatial cultures. 3. To reflect on the process of making maps as a creative and continuous development. The Map Your City project reproduced alternate visions for the respective cities and towns of the participants. As a result, there were 4 takeaways from the exercise. 1. Accuracy. Maps are not neutral objects. 2. Agency. The agency to produce maps should not only be limited to professionals in the built environment. 3. Activity or artifact. Mapping is both a processual activity and an artifact. 4. Adaptability. Mapping is a situated urban practice. Mapping is a transformative process. Conventional mapping methods disseminate knowledge of the world as known to the mapmaker. But the process of countermapping helps to visualize blind spots that were either unnoticed or hidden. They are local and place-centric imaginations that provide additional information to the known reality. Hence, the research produces senscapes, not landscapes, to map the experience of the Kumbh. It compiles the material and affective qualities of the festival and creates alternate knowledge systems to uncover future possibilities for the site. The research will assist in rethinking the process of mapping across various visual media and will build on the existing position of mapping as a continuous process and an open-ended project. Repositioning the local aims to bridge the gap between the illustrated and the lived reality. Using the Kumbh Mela as a liminal space, the study attempts to interpret the city by choreographing alternate mapping methods to facilitate multiple visions and versions for the site. In conclusion, I would like to thank my supervisor, Lakshmi Priya Rajendran, for guiding me through this research. Thank you so much for listening in to my reading. Here's passing on to Yingchun Juliet Song.
Thank you, Aishwarya, for the excellent reading. Hi, everyone. I am Yingchun Juliet Song, a student from the program Master of Architecture and Historic Urban Environments. I am going to read some extracts from the collection of interactive handmade artist books I created for my thesis project. which is exhibiting as part of the Bartlett Autumn Show. The title of my project, Divergent Mobilities, Experiencing Situated Double Consciousness of Immigrants in London. It narrows the topic from the possessionality of the multi-conscious self. Embarking from the ever-changing borough of Stratford, it represents a journey of navigation and interaction with urban environments to explore oneself and the concept of Londoners, delving into questions of where, who, and becoming. This is not the London I imagined, my friend who is visiting London for the first time exclaimed, full of confusion. So many languages I don't understand and so many different faces. London is a city for passengers. I really don't like slow walkers, but now thinking about it, sometimes I am as well. It's London that makes me grumpy. I've had enough of London. I'm ready to go home. I like it here. London is home, you know. A girl who moved here 2 years ago explained to me she would always introduce herself that she's from London. 12th June 2023, London. Waves and waves of heat kept coming to me as I walked out of Stratford Station. I juggled some groceries in my hands and wanted to get back home as fast as possible. A white man walked up to me from behind and caught me yawning. Sleepy? He asked. After a moment of surprise, I said, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. 你是中国人吗? Prejudice, assumptions, judgments, and showing offs. It seems that he has already reached a conclusion based on my appearance, a single story he has been taught. I rolled my eyes 1,000 times when he couldn't see while still answering politely. I do speak Mandarin. Seeming to push the judgments further, he said, I won't pretend that I can speak Mandarin, but I have lived in Shanghai. Which city in China are you from? How could you possibly assume? I suppressed my uncomfortableness and tried to be polite. I've lived in Beijing. I knew there was no point in arguing or showering him with all my controversial opinions. Upon realizing that I had no interest in continuing the conversation, if there ever was one, he bid us goodbye. I saw the familiar ArcelorMittal orbit and knew that I was home. I tend to be wary when I meet new people, tiptoeing the conversation and carefully steering it away from the topics of where are you from, a question we all encounter in our international urban environment. With a hidden meaning, it doesn't seem you belong here deep behind the sentence. It seems equivalent to, if I were to put you in a box, where shall I place you? Hey, Asian, you look like Mulan. Are you Japanese? I like Chinese, you people never cause any trouble. Strangers walked up to me on the streets, making assumptions and trying to break the ice. Where am I from? Where my parents or grandparents are from? Where I was born, grew up? Is it a place that I'm from, or is it a past? The people I've been with? The street I've set my feet on? Are we defined by the places or the places by us? 14th August 2023, Stowmarket. His long grey beard makes him look like Santa Claus. He knows nearly everything about natural building materials and plants. He grows crops in his back garden and uses his hand as a bowl. His form is thick like a brake and has only some fundamental functions. He is used to climbing up and down the ladder on a construction site where the only technology device he uses is a driller. He seems in tune with nature like a farmer, a grown-up countryside boy. The contradicting truths came out when the question, where are you from, was forced on him. Looking perplexed, he paused and shrugged. Where am I from? Who knows? London, maybe. Was born and raised there at least. Moved there a couple of years ago. The answer caused a burst of curiosity. A Londoner. Does he see himself as a Londoner or Londoner is him? What does Londoner mean to you? People who are born in London? Those stereotypical assumptions of cold and uncaring people you randomly run into on the streets? The ones that walk fast and the ones that don't use umbrellas. 25th July 2023, London. Earls Court Station. District line stops, people come and go. I lost myself in reading Risking Who One Is when an extremely unpleasant order struck my attention. I consciously frowned and held my breath for as long as I could. I peeked from the side of my eye and noticed a homeless-looking person settling down on the floor between two carriages on the tube. I felt my urge to look and continued reading, trying to ignore the smell that kept coming. It smelled like bins with rotten apples, making me uninterested in discovering their appearance. Hey, mate, are you hungry? A voice came to my attention from the direction of that man. I lifted my eyes and saw a well-dressed 35-ish man bending over to him, handing over a brown paper bag. The man was startled at first. Then he nodded and took over the bag, whispering, "Thank you." I suddenly had the urge to give him something else to eat or drink, but I didn't have any. I observed him while he took a paper box out of the bag, opened it, and devoured roasted vegetables and sausages with his dot-colored hands. A can of beer sat on the right side of his hand. He probably hasn't shaved in weeks and was wearing countless layers of winter clothing. It was 20 degrees. Wasn't it too warm for him? Or are those other clothes he wants? I felt deep empathy for the homeless-looking man who decided to sit on the ground instead of on the empty seats. He didn't bother anyone but quietly rested in the corner. Maybe I would have taken a look at him earlier. Fulham Broadway. He grabbed the can of beer he put on the ground and held tight to the brown paper bag. He stood up and disappeared from my sight as if he was never there. Moving to London was overwhelming. The uncertainty of not knowing anyone and how the city works overshadowed the excitement of freshness. Showered by possibilities you've never had, confusion caught up on you and you didn't know what kind of life it led. Now the unit for "how long have you been here" becomes years. You seem to know how everything works. You know where to stand on the platforms when going to uni or work because getting off right next to the exit saves so much time. You're starting to feel the familiarity of places and even a sense of home. But are you a Londoner? Or do you feel comfortable saying, "I'm from London"? Are you ready to bear the assumptions that the city holds? 21st August 2023, Ibiza. We hopped on a taxi after arriving on the island. The driver asked where we were from. Knowing it's never a simple question to answer, I replied, "We came from London just now." The driver gave an unnoticeable pause and said, "There are loads of people from the UK coming here. People speaking English everywhere, especially in the city you're staying in. It's not the best part of the island, and those people from Manchester and Liverpool, they drank all the time." Even though he tried his best to leave under note of it, to not to be offensive, it's not difficult to pick up a sense of disapproval in his response. Utilizing the five senses that provides our brains with signals and transport us elsewhere, dialogues with the city unfold, as we physically enter through doorways, walk beneath bridges, or climb ladders in London. We find ourselves teleported to diverse destinations, spanning the past, present, and the realm of imagination. Having more than one consciousness fractures realities into fragments. This allows us to not only embody the perspective of an Asian female or any other ethnicity, but also to observe as we navigate London. As revealed by the physicality of the books, the city exposes itself in layers, the obvious, the concealed, and the interconnected. 22nd August 2023, Ibiza. It felt safe walking down the street after dark. My friend said this is the kind of safety she seeks in a city like London, yet she never succeeded. She mentioned not feeling welcome in certain places as an Asian woman. A stranger interrupted our conversation by trying to invite us to the restaurant he works in. We rejected politely, but upon seeing our appearance, he asked, "Are you Japanese?" My friend inhaled with disbelief. I laughed and answered without slowing down, "Sorry, no." "You can't be Chinese, right?" he shouted as he walked away. Thank you for your attention. Now let's hear Muyun's reading. Floor is yours, Muyun.
Thank you, Julie Yingchun, for the talk. My name is Muyun, and I am also a student on the MA Architecture in Historic Urban Environments program. My reading is titled "Clothing London's Early Victorian Terraces for Climate Emergency." It explores an alternative attitude towards the retrofit of London's historic housing stocks in the context of climate change. According to the Mayor of London, London's average summer is projected to be a fifth drier and 3 degrees warmer by 2050, with increasingly frequent heat waves. However, the majority of London's historic housing stocks were not designed for such a climate. So how can we improve the environmental performance of London's historic homes with sustainable and resilient approaches without compromising historic fabrics and the knowledge they embody? There are several challenges in readying older homes for a warmer climate. The primary one is the current irreconcilability between heritage conservation concerns and environmental design practices. From a legal perspective, conservation laws and policies, as well as how they are enforced, make it extremely difficult to modify a protected property out of fears of the permanent loss of valuable historic fabrics and features. Local authorities, which are responsible for assessing applications for listed building consent, vary in stringency when it comes to judging whether consent is to be granted for a project. Camden Council, for example, is particularly defensive against proposed changes to historic fabrics. Its attitude is representative of a broader phenomenon in the UK in recent years. From a technical perspective, retrofitting a historic home is also complex and risky. Traditional buildings were designed to breathe, and sealing up internal spaces with impermeable materials to achieve a high degree of airtightness may trap and hold moisture, which may even result in structural damage. Responsible retrofit measures, as Historic England puts them, either require professional expertise that is not widely available to householders or are financially too inaccessible to them. Householders typically prefer simple and inexpensive solutions for specific issues, and they may either not be aware of the whole building approach advocated by Historic England and councils, or they may find it too complex to realize with resources that are available to them. Another challenge is the prohibitively high cost of well-considered and high-quality retrofitting measures, and the current approaches centered around airtightness and super insulation. It can cost up to £60,000 for a 3-bedroom house to attain the Passive House standard, and such price tag is inaccessible to the majority of ordinary householders. Is there another way forward through legislation? On a policy level, should we allow more flexibility for works on listed buildings and in conservation areas in the face of climate change, but in a sensitive manner so that no historical knowledge is lost? And on a grassroots level, can householders of the same terrace collaborate and share experiences and ideas by forming an association, as they are likely to have similar concerns with their homes? And is there another way forward through architectural design practice? For example, is it possible to seasonally close and unclose existing buildings? Could retrofitting be made more accessible and regulatable through the standardization of architectural interventions if architectural design practice for retrofits centers around commonality in the historic fabrics and valuable repetition that terrace housing offer? To explore these possibilities, the design research project sets out to create a propositional what-if pattern book, similar to a Georgian or Victorian pattern book that has been essential in the creation of London's many historic terraces. You may find this publication in both the digital and the physical show. This pattern book looks specifically at terrace housing, as it is a typology that, despite its evolution over the centuries, remains popular today due to the socioeconomic circumstances under which these houses were built. The plan forms, building techniques, and the construction processes were highly standardized. Therefore, this housing typology enables a potential and valuable sharing of common approaches and resources in today's context. Its goal is to inspire discussions on amending our planning legislations and on diversifying conservation practices. In this research, the London Borough of Camden is used as a site to study the issues and test ideas for several reasons. First, it contains a sizable quantity of Georgian and Victorian terrace housing stock, typical of much of in London. There are 40 conservation areas in Camden, covering approximately 50% of the total area of the borough, with more than 5,600 listed buildings. Second, I could speak from my personal experience as a Camden resident, as I have lived in said borough for over 5 years. Third, my part-time employment at a Camden-based architectural design practice has provided invaluable first-hand experience of architectural design and conservation practice in said borough, as well as the planning system in this borough. The first chapter of this pattern book looks at a typical early or mid-Victorian terrace, dissecting it to identify the elements and features of special historical and architectural interest. The second chapter looks at legislative documents and guidelines from both Historic England and Camden Council, questioning them and thereby identifying opportunities. For example, since Historic England requires proposals not to be disruptive to the architectural consistency of a terrace, does it mean the application of the same intervention to the entire terrace is then acceptable? As for the roofs, since an acceptable extension should follow the predominant form of extensions within a building group, does it mean a roof extension could be in any form if a terrace has no such predominant form? The council also recommends reinstatement of lost historic features. Could we then reinstate thatch roofs of medieval buildings that are no longer there? The third chapter speculates on new works that may be carried out on a typical terrace should the rules be expanded. It includes a catalogue of potential works, which draws inspirations from vernacular dwellings both within and outside of the UK. Double roof, for example, is a typical feature of chom houses in Vietnam. Can a secondary roof, thatched perhaps, be installed to mitigate the thermal disadvantage of rooms on the top floors? Can air wells, which are commonplace in terraces in East and Southeast Asia, be attached to the front of house to improve ventilation of the front rooms of house by harnessing the stack effect when the house is at risk of overheating in summer? Also, as wind catchers have proven to be extremely effective during the heat waves last year in countries like Egypt, can such devices be placed strategically to cool houses in summer by harnessing the prevailing wind? These interventions may not only enhance the performance of existing buildings, but also improve their habitability. With the secondary skin system, for example, inhabitants would feel more comfortable opening the windows to bring air into the rooms from the street side. The secondary skin may even become inhabitable, serving as an extension to the residents' living quarters. It is worth noting, however, that the options contained in this catalogue are by no means realistic proposals for London's or Camden's historic terraces. Instead, those seemingly absurd and outrageously fantastical proposals seek to present a design speculation on what is maximally possible if a new approach is adopted, one that centers on principles of commonality, reversibility, and flexibility. The proposals in the pattern book are intended to stimulate discussions and draw together different mindsets through serious and considered design research proposals, articulated visually for architects, planners, and conservation professionals with humor and delight. Additionally, a separate booklet is created for householders who may lack the time and resources to study the legislations and gain relevant technical know-how regarding what is legally, physically, and logistically possible. It can also be found in both the physical and digital autumn show. It consists of simple and accessible hand-drawn illustrations that accompany concise, easy-to-understand sentences in order to achieve greater accessibility for non-professionals. A discussion is urgently needed between householders, planning authorities, national heritage bodies, architects, and planners in order to find possible new approaches that are simpler, more economic, and more accessible to the average householder. Without such discussions, householders may be forced to act on their own without the knowledge of regulatory authorities, as they may rather face the legal consequences of their uninformed and ill-advised actions rather than suffering under the uninhabitable conditions inflicted by climate change. A review of current conservation policies and legislations is necessary, and some of the terms may need amendment or expansion to allow for more radical approaches that are presently only acceptable in theory under a creative interpretation of current policies and legislations. Through this design research, I sought to put forward a new approach for discussion, one that centers on the principles of commonality, reversibility, and flexibility, and prioritizes the integrity of historic fabrics and knowledge, rather than the maintenance of a traditionalist image. Heritage is not static but fluid. precedents such as Sir John Soane's Museum on Lincoln Fields have shown that dramatic interventions may be of future historical significance. A more open and less defensive mindset could not only facilitate more accessible measures to improve the performance of our historic homes, they may also diversify the meaning of heritage in the British context. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I shall now pass the mic on to Nassima.
Thank you, Muyun. I am Nassima, and I'm also a graduate of Architecture and Historic Urban Environments MA. And today I am very pleased to present and read parts of my master's thesis entitled The Side Effects of the World Heritage Status, a Critical Re-Exploration of the Medina of Fez. Since 1972, the UNESCO World Heritage designation stands as a testament to mankind's collective commitment to safeguarding our shared heritage. Over the past half-century, considerable efforts have been made, resulting in the protection of 1,199 sites to date. However, while the importance of heritage is beyond dispute, processes of heritagization and preservation can be problematic and lead to negative impacts, especially when applied to inhabited urban environments. One compelling epitome of heritagization issues is the historic Moroccan city of Fez, officially named Medina of Fez. It embodies a dual identity as a UNESCO World Heritage Site of exceptional cultural significance and an urban space wrestling with profound socioeconomic challenges. The Medina of Fez, on one hand, stands as one of the most meticulously preserved historical towns in the Arab world, bearing the World Heritage status since 1981. However, on the other hand, it confronts an array of prescient socioeconomic problems, including overcrowding, inadequate infrastructure, restricted accessibility, and alarming levels of crime and poverty. These issues collectively give rise to a phenomenon of urban blight, with the original inhabitants migrating to the modern city and thereby transforming the Medina into a marginalized enclave, primarily inhabited by the most economically disadvantaged communities. And despite the apparent disconnect between these two dimensions, it is essential to note the subtle relation between the living conditions within the Medina of Fez and its status as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, with the governance of the urban environment of the Medina being predicated upon the framework of the World Heritage Convention rather than the conventions of the Moroccan urban legislation. Consequently, this research aims to explore the connection between the livability problems of the Medina of Fez and its World Heritage status, with the goal to question the prevailing preservation paradigm. To achieve this, it is important to gain a comprehensive understanding of Fez heritagization projects, and this cannot be accomplished without placing this project within its multicultural, multi-layered historical context. Taking into consideration the city's significant role throughout the history of Morocco and the urban and political transformations it has undergone since its foundation. Therefore, the first chapter provides a historical overview to illuminate the key elements and foundations of Fez heritagization. This historical context serves as the basis for developing the study's methodology and framing its objectives. Founded in the 9th century, Fez had long served as an imperial capital of Morocco during multiple periods, including the beginning of the 20th century. The city's core, established on the two river sides of Wad Fas River, had continuously evolved in terms of size and urban planning approaches throughout several centuries. Today, this evolution is evident in the contrasting configurations of Fez El Bali and Fez Jdid, both parts of the old city that is recognized as a World Heritage Site. Fez El Bali, dating back to the 9th century, is characterized by an organic configuration and a significant compactness, stemming from a functional order rather than a geometric one. In contrast, Fez Jdid, built in the 13th century, features a more orthogonal layout. The configuration of the city walls also provides insights into the dynamics of expansion and extension. However, in 1912, When Morocco became a French protectorate, significant urban transformations occurred, interrupting Fez's evolution and changing its status. Immediately after the protectorate establishment, new colonial centers called Villes Nouvelles, which means new cities, were created outside of the existing Moroccan cities and were exclusively destined for French population. Fez Ville Nouvelle was erected a few kilometers in the southwest of the city. In parallel, there was a power shift to coastal cities, with Rabat Ville Nouvelle becoming the new capital instead of Fez, and Casablanca and Kenitra Ville Nouvelle established as economic centers. Accordingly, two distinct administrative departments were created to manage the urban settlements. The Department of Urbanism and Architecture, responsible for developing the new colonial cities, and the Department of Antiquities, Fine Arts, and Historic Monuments, tasked with preserving the Moroccan cities, hereupon known as Medinas. And a particular attention was given to Fez. In 1913, Fez was officially labeled as a historic city and became subject to holistic preservation. With the end of the Protectorate in 1956, the Ville Nouvelle continued to expand, shaping the contemporary city of Fez. In the meanwhile, efforts to preserve the Medina intensified, especially following its inscription as a World Heritage Site in 1981. Consequently, modern-day Fez encompasses two contrasting entities, both inhabited by Moroccans: the ever-evolving contemporary city and the preserved Medina, which natural evolution was interrupted in the early 20th century. Therefore, the process of heritagizing the Medina of Fez has its roots in the French Protectorate period, predating its inscription as a World Heritage Site. Accordingly, analyzing this heritagization requires delving into two key phases. The first one is the transformation of the Medina into a historic site during the French Protectorate period. And the second one is the subsequent elevation to heritage status after independence. Henceforth, this research examines the heritagization of Fez and its potential impacts on the livability through looking into these two pivotal phases and exploring their correlation and implications on the living conditions. The analysis is divided into two chapters and based on employing a combination of archival research and empirical analysis supported by a theoretical framework. The first chapter of the analysis delves into the historicization phase. In other words, how the city of Fez, or the Medina of Fez, was transformed into a city from the past. This chapter studies the actions led during the French Protectorate to transform the Medina of Fez into a historic site, and their impacts on different aspects of the urban environment, especially on the spatial and tangible ones, as they are the elements subject to preservation today under the UNESCO World Heritage Framework. The goal is to identify the negative impacts and understand their potential relation with the current socio-economic problems of the Medina, mentioned earlier. The second chapter of the analysis discusses the heritagization phase, with the nomination of Fez as a World Heritage Site. Actually, it mainly looks into how the nomination and subsequent management plan of the Medina of Fez have addressed the colonial legacy, and whether they listened, maintained, or fostered the negative impacts of the action led during the French Protectorate period on the Medina's livability. Based on these research findings, and in light of the identified problematic aspects, a third and final chapter explores an alternative methodology that aims at the reconciliation and synergy between the historical preservation of the Medina of Fez and the improvement of its living conditions as a living World Heritage Site that carries an outstanding cultural value, but also the weight of a complex history shaped by colonialism and forces of imposition. Finally, I would like to elucidate the primary objective of this project, which is not to provide solutions to specific problems in Fez, but rather to catalyze critical thinking and explore the possibility of developing alternative approaches to the prevailing paradigm of World Heritage preservation Faz is herein not the principal object, but rather an epitome for a bigger question: how to ensure the historic preservation of inhabited World Heritage cities without overlooking their intricate realities, nor undermining their changing and dynamic nature. And my reading ends with this question. Thank you for joining readings from the Bartlett, and to explore the Yingchun show further, please visit our exhibition at 22 Gordon Street, Bloomsbury until 6 October, or visit our online show, link in the description box. Thank you and good evening.